Okay, I believe we are finally up to the good of the cause for the public. The Board of Education recognizes the value of public comment on educational issues and the importance of providing an opportunity to the public to express themselves, to allow for a fair and orderly public comment period. Individual comments are limited to 5 minutes. Members of the public are reminded this is a public televised meeting to protect the privacy of all students and staff. Generally be addressed by first meeting with the appropriate administrative staff. Are there any members of the public wishing to address the board? Seeing none, I close the public portion, and we will go on to this evening's agenda. Board of Education items. Item number 1, can I please have a motion, the 2019-2020 school calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Chu, second by Mrs. Lax. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carried. Moving on to item 2, abolishing treasurer of school monies, position and reassignment of duties. Can I please have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Lax.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Chu. Is there any discussion? Okay, will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Chu.
Yes.
Mr. Sizemore.
Yes.
Mr. Hong.
Yes.
Mrs. Lax.
Yes.
Mrs. Reese.
Yes.
Mr. Seeler.
Yes.
Mr. Simmons.
Yes.
Mr. Winston.
Yes.
President Becker.
Yes, motion carries. Moving on to item number 3, resolution of the Board of Education rescinding the Board of Education's action taken on December 6th, changing the date of the school board election, which would leave the elections in November. Can I please have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Lax,
Second.
second by Mrs. Chu. Is there any discussion? Okay. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Chu.
Yes.
Mr. Sizemore.
Yes.
Mr. Hong.
Yes.
Mrs. Lax.
Yes.
Mrs. Reese.
Yes.
Mr. Seeler.
Yes.
Mr. Simmons.
Yes.
Mr. Winston.
Yes.
President Becker.
Yes, motion carries. Moving on to our curriculum and instruction. Can I please have a motion for item number 1, East Brunswick Flex Program enrollment?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Hung, second by Mrs. Lax. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carried. Financial services item, I'd like to combine items 1 through 6. Can I please have a motion for that?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Seeler, way to go. Second by Mrs. Lax. Is there any discussion?
It's a complicated house.
Okay, this is a roll call vote. Secretary, please call the roll.
Mrs. Chu.
Yes.
Mr. Sizemore.
Yes.
Mr. Hong.
Yes.
Mrs. Lax.
Yes.
Mrs. Reese.
Yes.
Mr. Seeler.
Yes.
Mr. Simmons.
Yes.
Mr. Winston.
Yes.
President Becker.
Yes, motion carries. Moving on to human resources, I'd like to combine items 1 and 2. There is a personal addendum. Item number 2, can I please have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Moved by Mrs. Chu, second by Mrs. Lax. Is there any discussion? Okay, this is a roll call vote. Secretary, please call the roll.
Mrs. Chu.
Yes.
Mr. Sizemore.
Yes.
Mr. Hong.
Yes.
Mrs. Lax.
Yes.
Mrs. Reese.
Yes.
Mr. Seeler.
Yes.
Mr. Simmons.
Yes.
Mr. Winston.
Yes.
President Becker.
Yes, motion carries. Moving on to information technology, can I please have a motion for item number 1, contract with Microsoft Corporation? Moved
So
by moved by Mrs. Reese.
Second.
Yeah.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Seal. Okay, I'm a little hard of hearing. Thank you. Okay. Boy, tough crowd. Any discussion? Mr. Hung.
Yes. So it's always good for us to use something for free. I realize this equipment will be returned after 3 months. Is there any action we're going to take to protect our students and schools' confidential information before we return those computers to Microsoft?
So with the devices,
Why don't you come to the
Can you come up,
podium?
please? Good evening. So with these devices, they're Windows 10 devices, and we're going to be able to manage them using the same resources that we're managing our Surfaces, something called Microsoft Intune. So that's how we basically will push out the wireless, push everything on them, and it'll also allow us to wipe everything clean when they're done, so they get kind of reset to factory setup.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Nick.
Nick, just a quick question. Is this the feature that you talked about where you can actually configure the computer before it's even removed from the box?
Yeah. So we get a list of device IDs from the vendor that we get them from, and then we can import them into the system, and it'll allow us to configure everything for the student. When they turn them on and right from out of the box, when they turn them on, they're linked with the school district, so
Good.
it's
Thank you.
easy out-of-the-box experience.
Good.
Is there a specific use or specific classrooms they're going to be in? I know there's a limited number.
The math classrooms are going to
The
be
math?
piloting this.
Anybody else? Thank you. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstain? Motion carried. Moving on to student services, I'd like to combine items 1 and 2. Can I please have a motion for that?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Hung.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Leck, sorry. Is there any discussion? Okay, this is a roll call vote. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Chu,
Yes.
Mr. Sismar.
Yes.
Mr. Hong.
Yes.
Mrs. Lax.
Yes.
Mrs. Reese.
Yes.
Mr. Seeler.
Yes.
Mr. Simmons.
Yes.
Mr. Winston.
Yes.
President Becker.
Yes, motion carries. Okay, moving on to committee reports. Normally I'd start with our student rep, but she sent me a very nice text tonight saying that unfortunately she's sick and she's really sorry she has to miss the meeting. So she looks forward to seeing us next meeting. So, are there any committee reports on the board? No committees? Okay, slow week. Well, speaking of committees, I just want to throw this out there. It's something I mentioned last meeting, but I'd like us to really think about and consider. Making our transportation committee more of an oversight committee, not just meeting for hazardous routes, but thinking about having it, 2-3 meetings a year. There's certainly, we've expanded our fleet of buses, we have bus drivers. Transportation is such a crucial part, and it ties in with so many other things. It ties in with security. And as we discuss various things in the district, even something like tweaking school start times, transportation's going to be a huge factor in that. So I was just wondering if anybody else had an opinion on kind of expanding the purview of that committee.
Makes sense.
Sound good? Something to think about? If we want to, is that something that we can just do? Do we have to take a formal consensus on it? I mean, it's already a standing committee of the board. I just wanted to meet rather than just once a year maybe if
No,
it has.
you have the right to do, I mean, under the bylaws, you have the right to, as a president, to create even ad hoc committees, but this, you could have them meet with more frequency, and whoever the chair of that committee, you should communicate with them.
I think the chair of that committee is Mr. Leewu.
Yes, so Mr. Liu can, based on the need, can absolutely expand the number of meetings to cover the broader topics that need to be covered.
So why don't you talk to Bernie and to Victor? We can get Joyce involved, and the other board, the other committee members, and see what you guys would like to do with this.
My plan is to, I'm going to do some research, and I will call other school districts in Middlesex County. And then I will try to meet Dr. Pulaski and meet Bernie and the director of the transportation individually, and then come up with a plan, and then start our first meeting.
That's great.
And just as you know, I mean, the transportation, the requirements for transporting students have become much more onerous for good reason. But just recently, for example, they passed a new law that mandates the testing of bus drivers with much more frequency. Acquiring CDL licenses to transport students is much more difficult. And as a result of all this, getting bus drivers is more difficult. And it's really a statewide issue. So it's an issue that I think a lot of districts are confronting and trying to address it to ensure that the students are safely transported. But your buses aren't just taking them to and from school. You have after-school programs, you have sporting events, you have, crossing state lines going to Manhattan for events. So it's a fairly onerous job transporting 8,200 students throughout your district.
And activity buses. There have been issues over the years, whether we have enough activity buses, whether we have enough activity buses at the right schools at the right times. Also because of our unique situation where the ninth grade is at Churchill, but ninth graders can participate in activities, particularly sports at the high school. We have buses for that also. So Liwu, just to remind you, Lori and Jeff are your board members on this committee, and Chad is the alternate. And again, alternates can assume that they will be able to go to a meeting. If I want to go to the meeting in your place, I'll let you know ahead of time. But I think that it's a good conversation. You may want to just call a meeting even before you do the research and kind of gather everybody's opinions.
I will talk to individual team members.
Yeah, and
let
Bernie
them
is your
know.
administrative liaison for that.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, any information items for the good of the cause for the board? Susanna?
I just have a question related to committees, and I think I've asked before. I don't believe there are formal charters for the committees, right?
No, there's not a formal charter for each
Is
of
that,
the.
do other school districts tend to do that?
No, so your bylaws specify your standing committees. So you have finance,
They list them out.
personnel, negotiations, they have them. And then the president has the right to create ad hoc committees. So, for example, if there's an issue that's of particular concern, you guys are ahead of the curve, but for example, a lot of districts recently have committed or created ad hoc security committees to address the security issues. You guys have addressed that, well in advance of a lot of other districts. But they don't have rules. Basically what happens is committees themselves meet with less than the quorum, so you don't notice them as public meetings, but they do take minutes, and your job as a committee, and the reason you have a committee structure is so that you can operate efficiently. The committees then meet together, make decisions at the committee level, and then report back to the full board so that the board can take action on them. And so they should comply with, good minute taking, comply with, the general, all the rules of the School Ethics Act, et cetera, but they wouldn't have specific bylaws. You should really be
Yeah,
governed
and
by-
I wasn't thinking so much in terms of like meeting protocol or anything like that. It's really more, what are the minimum expectations for the committee? So the transportation is a good example of that. So historically, it met for a certain reason, but it's a great idea to use it for, more strategic discussions as well. So I guess the answer is it's really up to the committee chair.
It's up to the committee chair, and it's also up to the
the-
board. I mean, the board, depending on the needs of the district, the board can say, so for example, you have a negotiations committee. Now, when you're in negotiations, we were in negotiations with EBEA, we're in negotiations with EBA-PSA. That's a very busy committee right now. In off years, when there's no negotiations going on, they might not need to meet with the same frequency. But I think that it's ultimately the chair in consultation with the board saying, I think we need to meet more often, this is what I'd like to do. And that's why you have chairs of each of these committees so they can report back to the board and get guidance from the board as a total as to what the board's desire is. And that's why you guys have created committees. I mean, you guys created the personnel committee. You didn't have that, but now you have a standing personnel committee because that's something that the board desired. And then they set up the meetings when they need to meet with whatever frequency they just think is appropriate.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Okay. Any information items or for the good of the cause of the board? Anybody? Chad?
This is to relieve Mrs. Laxford's stress. Harlem Wizard tickets, to reiterate, are still on sale. The game is next Sunday. Go online to get them at harlemwizard.com or reach out directly to Michael Axe at 9, no, I'm just kidding. I won't do that.
Call at 2 in the morning?
Yep.
Thanks. Anybody else have anything to say? Okay, we do have a need for a closed session. Whereas the Board of Education must discuss matters which are not appropriate for discussion in public meeting. Whereas the Board of Education intends to discuss matters as followed, those listed on tonight's agenda. The length of the closed session is estimated to be 60 minutes, after which the public meeting of the board shall reconvene and action may be taken. Now therefore be it resolved that the East Brunswick Board of Education will recess into closed session for only the aforesaid subjects.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Lax. Second by Mr. Seaver. Thank you. I'm sorry, you just can't hear. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Good night.